Hi everyone, and welcome to another review by ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie, and together we review games from two different perspectives. I'm all about the mechanics and Maggie is all about the theme. Today we're excited to be reviewing for you Hegemony, a game by Varnavas, Timothou and Vangelis Bagiatakis. So let's get into it.
So in Hegemony, we're going to be simulating a modern nation where every player is going to be taking the role of a different social class. So someone will be the working class, someone will take the role of the middle class, someone will be the capitalist, and someone will have the lucky role of playing the state, trying to keep everybody in balance and a bit of harmony in this whole nation. The whole game plays out, obviously, we all have very different agendas. And so ultimately, whoever's going to be victorious is going to be whoever manages to meet the needs of their people best by doing a great job of the push and pull of policies and how all of the different economic levers play out.
Now, Hegemony is a completely asymmetric game in that each player takes over one of the social classes, and you're going to have different objectives and slightly different actions available to you to get things done in this game. Now, every faction or class has a unique deck of cards, and these cards have actions depicted on them. Now, on your turn, it's very simple. All you're going to do is either play one of these cards for the action that's depicted on the card, or trash or discard the card and take one of the basic actions available to you. You'll then have the option of taking a free action as well, which is a less powerful action, but can help you get some necessary things done in the game. Now, the best way to talk about what you're trying to achieve in this game is to talk about the two extremes of, I would say, the simplest factions to understand. The first is the working class. Now, as the working class, you care deeply about your people. You're trying to keep them fed. You're trying to get them educated. You're trying to increase your population size, and you're trying to give them some technology or entertainment to keep them happy. Ultimately, you're trying to do all of this to increase your prosperity track, which is the tracker of your happiness, but ultimately the victory point in this game. You're going to send your workers out to go work for public companies and private companies to make a good wage, to be able to buy all of these goods, and then to translate that into fulfilling the needs of your people. Not happy with the conditions that the other players are placing on you? Well, guess what? You can go on strike. So as the working class, you have the ability to stop work, meaning you're not going to get paid. But hey, guess what? The people who own the companies are not going to get the goods that they produce. So now let's talk about that faction. At the other end of the spectrum is the capitalist class. Now, the capitalist class own a lot of the private companies, and your goal as the capitalist is to make lots of money. In fact, the more money you make each round, the more victory points you're going to get. And you're going to be doing that by opening new companies, attracting a workforce in the form of other players, and then paying them a wage to generate a lot of resources, which you can then export to international markets. That's going to allow you to play a game of profit and loss and hopefully make as much money as possible by the end of the game. Now, the next faction is the middle class, and the middle class is a really interesting faction because they have the tensions of both the capitalist class and the working class. As the middle class, you are going to be running a series of small businesses that are able to generate resources with the right workforce as well, but not nearly to the extent of the capitalist class. You still get the opportunity to export, to make money, but also you are responsible for increasing the prosperity or happiness of your people. So you have a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, and you're really trying to balance those two tensions, side with the working class sometimes you want to lower taxes like the capitalist class, and you're trying to balance that out to get ahead. Now, the final faction is the state, and in the state, you are going to be taking the role of the government, overseeing the public sector. So that means you're going to be controlling the public services and the resources that are available. But most importantly, you're trying to keep the other three classes in balance. So as the state, you have a series of trackers that are going to represent the legitimacy of each of the other classes, and your role is to really give them benefits across the course of the game in order to make sure that no one gets too far ahead. We want everybody to be equal in this society. The other thing you're going to be dealing with is a series of events that occur that you're going to have to try to deal with at the same time as trying to achieve your political agenda. Now, that brings me to one of the main parts of the game. So in this game, there is a policy table that represents all of the different tax and social welfare policies, as well as immigration and foreign trade policies that are available for players to manipulate. And they're going to manipulate by voting on changes to current policy. And that has a real flow-on effect for the rest of the game. It's going to set the prices of resources, both importing them from overseas and the amount that they're sold for from the state, as well as the tax rate, which of course impacts all players in one way or another. At the end of the game, the person with the most victory points will win. But now let's talk about how we felt about the game. And firstly, can I just say, this game, you know, a game comes along every now and then and you play it and then you can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah.
Like, I found myself just walking around town thinking about this game, thinking about my strategy and how to win as each one of the different classes.
Yeah. It is highly thematic. Absolutely.
That is the understatement of...
The reason why you couldn't stop thinking about it the reason I couldn't stop thinking about it was more because of the chaos that it caused the first time we played, and how deeply upsetting it was when, you know, someone was playing as a working class going, oh my goodness, this is exactly why I can't get ahead in real life.
How do I get ahead as the working class?
Feeling the real life pain of these dynamics in play.
And that is the beauty of this game. Playing as all of the classes, and I've played as all of the classes, they each have this entrenched motivation, and the motivation mirrors real life. And so as soon as you start playing this game, you get it. You're playing as the capitalist, right? I need to make money. And how am I going to do that? By putting a lot of pressure on everybody else around the table and, you know, putting my prices up sometimes, and sometimes I'm going to put wages down. But that's how I need to get ahead. And it is really compelling because you feel that motivation. It's so thematic. I found this game super thematic.
Yeah, which makes it almost like, as a themer myself, like it makes it a lot easier to understand the flow, because you just have to get into the mindset of, well, yeah, as that class, what is it that you'd want to do? I also love that it's so deeply informed by actual like academic and theoretical background. It even comes with a full booklet of all of the economic and social concepts and political concepts. So it's deeply, deeply researched. This is not a pasted on theme. This is one of those games which started from theme, and every mechanic is sort of implemented backwards from how that theme plays out in real life.
And you can feel that because as the working class, what are your available levers to you? Well, you are the workforce in this game. And so you are really trying to be scrappy. You're trying to do what you can to pull together enough money to educate your people.
Get food on the table and
you know what? You're going to fight for free education, for free healthcare. And so that's what you're doing. But also sometimes you need to purchase those goods from the capitalists. And that feels like, oh, I'm just helping the capitalists get ahead. And so maybe I'm going to go on strike. And what are the things that are available to me that I can threaten with, you know, to keep myself alive?
Negotiate with.
And then the middle class, you really do feel caught between the two classes.
Yes.
So you are a small business owner, which means, guess what? Your running costs are not as high, but also you're not producing as much.
Yeah.
And you want to keep your taxes low. You want to keep wage bills low, but also you're trying to make your people happy. And it's harder as the middle class. There's a lot of different tensions.
Sometimes you yourself are drawing a salary because you might be working in some of the companies that the capitalists run. So it's like, well, you might actually be invested in the salary not being too low. And so it just, it creates this very clever, well, you know, yes, I'm invested in education, but at the same time, you know, I sell education. So I don't want it to be too cheap because I want to make, profit from it. Very, very clever.
Now, I want to talk about my favorite mechanic in this game that is related to why I think it feels so thematic. So the card play is excellent. The unique decks for each of the factions are really cool because the actions that are available to you all have a thematic tie-in that feels super in line with the class. So for example, the capitalist is thinking about buying a private island while the working class is just trying to get enough food together to feed their people. So the extremes are really well played out in the thematic tie-in with the cards. But what I really want to talk about is the voting system in this game, or the public policies that are in play, because depending on which policies that the players around the table decide to put in play or where the influence and power lies, that has profound ramifications for the way that the economy comes together and the way that the game plays out. And that, to me, is the key thematic engine driving everything that happens in this game. Because, for example, if you've got a couple of players, say the middle class and the working class, join forces to try to bring healthcare as low as possible, to make healthcare free, for example, then they can just go to the state and get those resources for free. And that puts a lot of pressure on the capitalist class because they're trying to sell healthcare and now they need to lower their prices to become more competitively attractive. And there are other things going on like the tax rate. So the capitalist wants to make tax as low as possible, but then the state is not getting as much money from taxes, and that hampers its ability to get its job done. And it's just so fantastic. I love the immigration policy.
Yes.
Because there's this really interesting tension in the game where new companies are opening, both public and private, but they need workers. And so the more workers that are coming into the economy, the more the economy is going to thrive. But the working class and the middle class start to get this avalanche of people, and then they're trying to manage those people by feeding them.
There's more mouths to feed, but at the same time, now there's also more workforce to be able to produce,
money
to like generate more income.
And so all of the public policy, the way that works is there is a bag with votes that are added throughout different mechanics in the game and different actions that players are taking. You also have these additional influence cubes that you can get to manipulate the results of the election after it's been revealed. And this is a really balanced, fun dynamic. And that leads me to my next point about this game, that I think this game has the perfect amount of interaction and negotiation.
I think it's one of those games where you're always invested in what everyone else is doing, but the interaction, even though there's things that are like, hey, we're both invested in this, come on, and sometimes like, oh, I don't know, that we're definitely in opposition. It never really felt confronting in a nasty way or in like a icky way, aside from just the parallels to real life of going, oh yeah, those dynamics, this is how they play. But around the table, it makes sense. We all know what what everyone's goal is, and because I also really love how clear it is when the way it's sort of depicted. It's very clear when these markers go to the left, then that's going to be more of a socialist, going to be benefiting the working class. When it's all the way to the right, is benefiting the capitalist. So being able to kind of keep, the push and the pull, and very clearly go, well, what's going to be more advantageous? Well, you have a lot of things on your end, so maybe it's time for some of these things to be, this way.
But what's not evident when you first look at this game is the importance of that middle class in balancing out the two desires of the extremes, because the middle class is like the swing vote. And as the capitalist, you're talking to the middle class and saying, hey, we both want lower taxes. Let's work together. Like, come on, I'm going to try and pass this bill. You're going to say yes, and we're going to have lower taxes across the board. And that's great for us. And sometimes the middle class will be like, yeah, that does sound like a great idea. And other times they've got the working class saying, but what if we had free education? And the middle class is like, yeah, I've got people who need to be upskilled. And so that sounds great too. And so you're like, sometimes trying to work together. And that is super interesting because you're trying to balance out who you're working with at what point in the game. You're keeping an eye on who's pulling ahead in the game. And if that person's pulling ahead, maybe you don't want the policies to be in their favor. And I just think that is so brilliant. The balance of the different classes is so great and I found it such a challenge because when we were playing with different people, little comments would come out every now and then like, oh, there's no way you can win as the working class. Or, oh, it's impossible to win as the middle class. And then I played as each class and made it.
So I can win as any class.
But that's what I got obsessed with it. I was like, there must be a way to win as this class.
I would say, and I don't know if you agree, I felt like the moral of the story here was no class could ever win in isolation. You always had to bring at least one other group along with the journey. So if you're the working class by yourself, it's very, very hard. unless you either sway a little bit of the middle class to kind of be on your side, or definitely help develop the state so that you have a lot of things in the public sector and gives you a lot more options.
That's the thing. The importance of swinging things in the favor of the public services and the state, if you're the working class, it's really important to have those options available to you. And so I will say in this game that playing against a player who has not played this before, you are almost certainly going to win if you're a skilled player. It is one of those games that the more the players understand the levers that are available to them, the more they're going to push their agenda from the very beginning. And that is going to set them up for a great game, because we found that as we got more experience with this game with our friends, it was such a close finish. Like all of us would be
like within a couple of points each. Which is quite amazing for such an asymmetric game. And it doesn't always play out that way. Like I was the other thing, every time this game plays out, it's a completely different personality of a nation that you get to sort of see come to life in front of you. So let's talk a little bit about player count. I felt like this game was ideal at 3 players when you had working class, capitalist, and then that middle class. I felt like then that's at the point where you had the perfect kind of balance of the dynamics, the push and pull, and then someone who could be the that sort of tiebreaker.
Absolutely. This game shines at 3 players. It's fantastic. It is long.
Yes, it is a long game.
Yeah, it's a long game. It can run up to 3 or 4 hours, particularly if you've got a new player in the mix. But at 3 players, you do have, it didn't feel long.
No, so this is, again, one of those, like, I love those games where even though you're playing for a good chunk of time, at no point you're like, the downside, the downtime of this is painful, or just like, I'm kind of over what I'm doing. Like, there's so much investment in what you're trying to achieve and in that getting ahead that, at no point does this feel slow.
Yeah, that's very strange because it's quite a long game, but I don't want it to be any shorter. I feel like there's just enough time to get everything that I want to get done. And, you know, sometimes when we've played this, we've just played it again back to back. And if you think about that, it's almost 6 hours of playing one game, and it still feels enthralling. And that is like high praise, I think, of this game.
Even when you play the same class, is when my experience, even playing the same class again, which obviously is still technically the same goal, you can play out different strategies. Because again, you don't know what balance those policies are going to be and where you might have to, where you might have to pivot and do something else or explore something else. So again, every single game was actually really, really engaging.
Anyway, so we digressed a little bit. The fourth, the class is the state. And so the 4th player is going to play as the state, or if you include the automa, which we'll get to in a moment, you can also play as the state. But the state has a very different agenda. They are all about balance and about kind of gifting services and money and funding to different classes in order to make them successful, while also trying to maximize, of course, the amount of revenue that the state has available to it. It's a really different experience playing as the state. The state, of course, has these unique events that it has to deal with, but the events don't really involve other players. They're just kind of mini goals that you need to achieve each round. You've also got another goal in the form of the policy that you're trying to make happen, the political agenda. And so you can see it has this abstract grid, like set of desires for what policy should be by the end of the round. I didn't find the state nearly as thematic as the other factions, because there's a few just abstract levers that you're trying to pull. This political agenda has no thematic overlay.
Yeah, and I wish there was like there was a name for, what's it called, or what could be a fun name for when you have a society that has this particular distribution of policies.
Yeah.
As opposed to just like political agenda, these places, these things here.
Yeah, and I kind of felt when I played as the state that I was influencing other people's games by giving them like resources and things to use. But, it wasn't strong enough to feel like I was interacting with other players. But if they'd made it any stronger, it would have created a whole heap of randomness that wouldn't work with the strategy of the other players. So I can kind of see what they were going for. It's not my preference to play as the state. And for that reason, I think the game is just absolutely perfect without it. So the 3-player game, perfect.
So we should talk also about you can play this solo and you can play it with the introduction of automa. So they have automas to replace all the different classes. So you could essentially, ideally, imitate or add that automa in a multiplayer game to bring in the other classes essentially and replicate, like add players who aren't necessarily there. The way the automa works is interesting that they've got two different modes. One is like a more basic mode where essentially you're going to be revealing one of the automa cards in each class has their own automa deck. So they're all going to have, different or their own unique flow of actions. And then you do a bit of a hierarchy of what type of action would it prefer to do, and then if you can't do it, you move on to the next, to the next, to the next. So it obviously helps. So that this one's fairly straightforward, and if you can't do any of those, then the special action or a backup kind of action. So it's going to help obviously move some of the things around, refresh different things, propose different bills, or help vote for or against different things. This is the basic version. Is relatively easy to implement for any, like even if you're adding a couple of them, but it still does take away from, like you'd still get a little bit distracted from what you were doing.
Facilitation time.
The facilitation time. There is, and what I found with this is because it's very basic, it's not as smart at really understanding what's going on at a deeper level. And so it usually won't be that difficult.
Imagine if it did understand what was going on at a deeper level, that would be terrifying.
Well, it does in the advanced mode. So it does have an advanced mode where it becomes a lot more complex in terms of how you implement it, because you kind of have these different like priority columns, and then you're moving the items around in terms of what those actions could be. That, like for me, that's far too much investment and time to put into an automa. I would never really play it that way.
And we played 2 players with an automa. We've played 3 players with an automa, and for my preferences, I just don't like the facilitation because it takes people out of the game. But in this particular game, the beauty in it is the table talk.
Yes.
Like the way you feel really smug when you get something done, or when you get to change the policy, the way that you get that satisfaction of convincing somebody else to get on board with your agenda.
Getting your political way, so to speak.
That is the joy of this game. And obviously an automa can't replicate that joy. So for me, this is just the perfect 3-player Euro.
I also find like there was a lot of like they've got all these different kind of single cards to explain every single different thing that the automa does, or how do they pick this thing. And like even this like becomes a little, even with the basic mode, that back and forth I find becomes a little bit distracting.
So who is the game of Hegemony for? Well, first of all, you really need to be into the theme.
Yeah.
If you are not into this theme,
this is going to be painful.
Yeah, so painful. Like if you're like, I like fantasy and dragons, this is not for you.
Yeah.
Just the way that fantasy and dragons are sometimes not for us. Yeah. But we absolutely loved this game. Like all of the economic elements of this game, the political elements. Actually, I found it way more intensely interesting than I thought it would from the description of the game.
I agree. Yeah, I agree that I was a lot more engaged and enjoying myself and invested with and even with different classes, like playing as the different classes, going, how do we crack this? How do we figure this out?
Yeah, and it never ventures into like a negative space. And that could be really easy with a game like this, with these sorts of tensions that you're dealing with. So I really, really love the way the theme has been implemented. But if you're not into it, not for you. There are a couple of little things about this game. One, it's a table hog. Obvious.
Yes.
It's huge.
This is a pretty big table, and we're not even able to fit the state board here, and some of the splaying things we weren't able to even fit.
And that is a real concern for some people, so please do keep that in mind. The second thing is, it is quite difficult to get your head around all of the asymmetry. It does help if you obviously get to know each of the classes first before playing. But I did find that the working class and the capitalist class are probably the easier beginner classes to get immediately into the game. There's also a great player reference, well, 2 for each faction. There's a short one that is helpful for once you have a good grasp of the class. And then there's a longer one that can help with some of the nuance of the rules for that class.
Which is quite handy because the rule book itself, I found that it was probably good as an introduction to the concepts.
Yeah.
But then when you actually needed to go back and look for a specific thing, very tricky.
I did not like the layout of the main rulebook itself. Really hard to wayfind through this rulebook. Really hard because there's no card reference at the back. It's just some FAQs about the different cards, which are kind of in order, but not really. I don't know. I found it a little bit cumbersome that when there was a small edge case rule to try and find where that would be in the rule book, no idea. So I do hope,
house roulette or table roulette.
Yeah, I hope that gets cleaned up a little bit in a future edition of the game. And the third thing was just a small thing. There is one card that is a great round summary that we follow along to play out each of the sections of the round. However, it's yellow, which is the same as the middle class color.
Yeah, so you go, is this the card for this color?
Yeah.
And it's like, no, so that should have been a different color.
It should have been a different color. That's a minor thing. Minor thing because we're about to talk about our ratings of this game. This game is so good. But I will say my one thing about this game is that it's going to be hard to get it to the table with a large variety of players. However, I'm going to caveat that with the fact that at first I thought our friends would not be into this.
I was like, when are we that this game's never going to hit
the table. Like you and I might play it, but nobody else.
Yeah.
But then they were so into it.
Yeah, as soon as someone would play, so people were initially quite curious about the concept, going, okay,
about that.
Well, I actually had when I explain it, and I talk about what have you been playing? It's like, oh, I've been playing this game. And again, it depends on who's going to resonate with this theme. Yeah. So they're like, oh, that's really intriguing. Okay, that's cool. But then when you play it, without it, every single time people are like, yeah, I'm keen to play this again now that I know what I'm trying to do. And again, it's like wanting to play that same class again to sort of see how they can make it work.
Yeah.
And then that's just one class. Then you've got the opportunity of going, well, do you want to venture into one of the other classes?
The game has layers, and when you play it the first time, it's been a long time since I've had a game where my friends have also messaged me saying, I can't stop thinking about this game. And we've had these great conversations about what do you think the strategy is for this class? And I love that about it. And for that reason, my rating of this game is a 9.1, which is going to put it pretty close to being in my top 10 games. And it's also almost certainly going to position it well for Game of the Year this year.
Wow.
What did you give it?
Well, as I've said, this game is incredibly thematic, probably one of the most thematic eras I have ever played. And it just makes sense. It's just logical. The banter that it generates, because it all just fits. So because of all that, my rating is a 9. So it's pretty close to you. So that's definitely going to put it in,
and that's high
contender for the year.
Absolutely.
Very much a contender for a top 10 potentially of all time.
So it's ticking the box on mechanics and theme. There's not much higher praise that we can give a game than that. I hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please hit like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now.
Bye.